The penthouse was silent, save for the rhythmic, mechanical hum of Seoul breathing 100 floors below. Baek Jin-woo sat in the far corner of the glass-walled restaurant, a man of lethal silence whose very presence seemed to dim the surrounding luxury. His sharp eyes, cold and calculating, tracked every micro-movement in the room with the precision of a predator who had spent decades in the dark. Though he wore a suit that cost more than most men made in a year, the intricate, dark tattoos peeking from beneath his crisp white cuffs whispered the jagged truth of his history. He was a former underground mafia boss turned reclusive businessman who had traded a life of visible blood for a life of pulling strings in the shadows. He didn't come here to be seen. He came for the absolute anonymity that only the elite could afford. He lived by a singular, rigid loyalty code. Never let the ghosts of the past touch the present. He was a ghost in a machine of his own making, a man who had mastered the art of being powerful while remaining entirely invisible to the world he once ruled with an iron fist. Across the floor, Chun Hae-rim adjusted her apron with hands that shouldn't have been steady. She was a quiet, observant waitress, a woman who had mastered the art of being part of the furniture while seeing the world in high definition. For months, she had worked these grueling shifts, her eyes never leaving the corner booth where the Iron Wolf occasionally appeared. Unbeknownst to the high society diners, she wasn't here for the tips. She was a woman on a mission of quiet vengeance. She had memorized every detail of Baek Jin-woo's arrival, the way his security detail fanned out, the way he never sat with his back to the door, and the way he looked at the city like he owned the souls within it. She knew the connection between this man and her brother's disappearance was real, even if the trail was buried under layers of corporate shell companies and cold silence. Tonight was the night she would stop watching and start acting, regardless of the danger that pulsed from his direction. When Jin-woo finally looked up, he signaled for service with a slight incline of his head. Hae-rim felt her pulse quicken, but she didn't falter. She approached the table with a grace that masked the hurricane raging in her chest. Jin-woo didn't look at the menu. He never did. He ordered a simple burger, a grounded, almost peasant-like choice for a man who lived in the clouds. It was his ritual, a final link to the man he used to be before the city belonged to him. "Medium rare," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that barely carried over the soft jazz playing in the background. Hae-rim nodded, nodding the way his sharp eyes scanned her face for a fraction of a second, looking for a threat she was careful to hide. She took the order and retreated, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. In the kitchen, the steam and the noise provided a temporary shield as she prepared the one thing that would bridge the gap between his luxury and her truth. The burger was plated with artisanal precision, but as Hae-rim carried it back to the floor, her focus was on the small, grease-stained corner of paper tucked into her palm. She approached Jin-woo's table one last time, her heartbeat echoing in her ears like a drum. As she set the plate down, her fingers worked with a desperate, practiced cunning. She slid a small, folded note beneath the bun of the burger, her eyes remaining fixed on the table to avoid the lethal gaze of the man sitting there. She felt his presence like a physical heat, a predatory aura that warned her to run. Instead, she turned away with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes, vanishing back into the crowd of servers before he could even reach for his silver. She had delivered her message. Now, the clock was ticking on a life she had spent 24 years building. Jin-woo reached for the meal, his hand freezing midair as he felt the unfamiliar, sharp texture of paper hidden beneath the food. He didn't react outwardly, his face remained a mask of marble, but his heart hammered against his ribs. He unfolded the note slowly beneath the table, shielding it from any prying eyes. It wasn't a threat or a demand. It was a hand-drawn, blood-red lily. It was the private sigil of a man he had betrayed and thought dead 10 years ago, Hae-rim's brother. The Iron Wolf felt a cold sweat prickle his skin, the luxury of the penthouse suddenly feeling like a tomb. The red lily was a ghost, a reminder of a night in the shipyard where loyalty was traded for power. He looked up, his gaze searching the room for the waitress, but she was gone. The note was a cold realization. The past had finally caught up to the present, and it had a face he didn't recognize. He left the restaurant with the note clutched in a fist that had ended empires. He didn't take his car. He needed the biting, cold soul rain to clear the fog of shock that threatened to paralyze him. He stood in the shadows of the employee exit, his instincts as a tracker returning with a terrifying muscle memory familiarity. When Hae-rim emerged, her shoulders hunched against the downpour and her pink backpack hanging crookedly, he saw her not as a waitress, but as a key. She walked with a purpose that suggested she knew she was being followed, or perhaps she simply didn't care anymore. Jin-woo moved silently, a ghost in a $5,000 suit, closing the gap through the neon-lit streets of Gangnam. He watched her navigate the back alleys, moving away from the light and into the darkness where his world existed. He realized she wasn't leading him into a trap. She was leading him into a reality he had spent a decade trying to ignore. In the shadows of a narrow, rain-slicked alleyway, he finally cornered her. Hae-rim didn't scream when the massive, intimidating frame of the Iron Wolf blocked her path. She stood her ground, her face pale but her eyes burning with a fierce, reckless determination that reminded him of someone he once loved. "I know who you are, Baek Jin-woo," she whispered, her voice cutting through the sound of falling water. "And I know what you did to my brother." Jin-woo stayed silent, his calculations shifting from how to eliminate her to how a girl like her had survived long enough to find him. The air was thick with a tension that was suddenly shattered by the screech of tires at the end of the alley. A black sedan roared toward them, windows rolling down to reveal the cold, matte barrels of suppressed weapons. It wasn't Jinwoo's men. It was a hit squad from his old syndicate, the very people he thought he still controlled from the shadows. Before the first muzzle flash, Jin-woo grabbed Hae-rim, throwing her behind a concrete pillar with a strength that left her gasping. The silence of the alley was replaced by the metallic thwip of bullets chewing into the brick just inches from their heads. Jin-woo didn't hesitate. He pulled a compact weapon from his shoulder holster, returning fire with a precision that turned the sedan's windshield into a web of cracks. "Stay down!" he barked, his first words to her since the restaurant. The hit squad was professional, moving in a coordinated pincer movement, but they hadn't fought the Iron Wolf in years. They had forgotten why he was the one who survived the purges. He moved through the shadows like a wraith, neutralizing the first two gunmen before they could even adjust their aim. This wasn't just a random attack, it was a message. His syndicate had found out about the note, and they wanted both the boss and the waitress silenced before the truth could surface. When the alley finally fell silent again, Jin-woo didn't leave her there. He bundled a shivering, wide-eyed Hae-rim into a hidden vehicle parked blocks away and drove toward his most secure, fortified penthouse. He knew the city was no longer his playground. The hunters had become the prey, and they were stuck together in a game where the rules had been rewritten in blood. The drive was tense and wordless, the only sound the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers and the distant sirens of police who would never find the shooters. Hae-rim watched him with a mixture of terror and awe, realizing that the man she had hunted was far more dangerous, and perhaps more broken, than her brother's diaries had ever suggested. As they pulled into the underground garage of his estate, Jin-woo looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You wanted the truth," he said. "Now you're going to live through it." Inside the high-security estate, the contrast between the pristine marble floors and Hae-rim's soaked, tattered uniform was jarring. Jin-woo finally broke his code of silence. "Why did you bring that note to me?" he demanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Hae-rim sat on the edge of a designer chair, refusing to be intimidated even as she shook from the cold. She told him about her brother's work as a low-level clerk who had seen too much, specifically, the ledger of a trafficking operation that Jin-woo had supposedly shut down years ago. She described the night he vanished, the way the police had filed it as a runaway case, and the way she had spent 6 years piecing together his final days. She wasn't just a witness. She was a survivor seeking a truth that only a monster could provide. Jin-woo listened, his face a mask of granite, as he realized the clean business he had built was a lie. As she spoke, Hae-rim's eyes fell upon the tattoos on Jin-woo's arms, not just the marks of his rank, but a hidden, ink-stained narrative of the night her brother disappeared. "He wrote about a man with a wolf on his wrist," she said, her voice trembling. Jin-woo looked down at the dark ink. The wolf wasn't a mark of honor. It was a mark of an operation he had been told went perfectly, a liquidation of assets that he had been assured were criminals. He realized then that his lieutenant hadn't just been sloppy. He had been building a separate empire of human trafficking and disappearance right under Jin-woo's nose for a decade. The very man who had convinced him to retire into luxury was the one who had turned his legacy into a graveyard. The tattoos weren't just history. They were a roadmap to a betrayal that went deeper than he could have imagined. The realization that his own organization was rotten to the core hit Jin-woo harder than any physical blow. He had spent years hiding in luxury, believing he was still the master of the board, while his subordinates were turning his territory into a slaughterhouse. He checked his encrypted business accounts on a hidden terminal, finding thousands of untraceable transactions linked to logistics, fronts he had personally approved. The Iron Wolf had been a puppet king, kept in a golden cage of silence while predators harvested the vulnerable in his name. Every dollar he had made in the last 10 years felt tainted with the blood of innocence he had sworn to protect in his youth. Hae-rim watched the mask of the billionaire crack, revealing a man hollowed out by the weight of his own blindness. She saw an opportunity not just for her brother, but for a justice that went deeper than simple vengeance. "You can pull the strings, Jin-woo," she said, "but you've been pulling them for the wrong people." Hae-rim proved her bravery by volunteering to go back to the rooftop restaurant, now bugged with Jin-woo's sophisticated listening devices. She served the men she knew were responsible for her brother's pain, her hands steady as she refilled wine glasses for the very lieutenants who had betrayed Jin-woo. Through her earbud, Jin-woo listened to his former friend's joke about inventory and disposables. Every word was a nail in the coffin of his old life. He realized that the loyalty code he lived by was a relic that only he still respected. The men he had trusted with his life were now discussing the market price of lives they had stolen. From his command center, Jin-woo recorded every confession, his face a mask of cold fury. He watched through a hidden lens as Hae-rim moved between the tables, a silent predator in a waitress's uniform, collecting the evidence that would burn his world to the ground. The intelligence they gathered was chilling. The syndicate had realized Hae-rim was the one who had contacted Jin-woo. They issued a direct order. She was to be acquired for her rare blood type, and Jin-woo was to be retired permanently. The traffickers weren't just a rival gang, they were a global network that saw people as merchandise. Jin-woo knew he had to act before they moved. He received a call on a burner phone. It was his lead lieutenant, the man who had served him for 20 years. "Boss, you're getting sentimental," the voice said. "The girl is worth more than your loyalty. Hand her over and we'll let you keep the penthouse." Jin-woo looked at Hae-rim, who was watching him with a mixture of fear and trust. He didn't answer the phone. He snapped it in half, his decision made. He would break every rule he ever had to ensure she didn't become another entry in their ledger. Jin-woo decided to get his hands dirty, violating his own rules of remaining a reclusive businessman. He began making calls to the few men he knew were still loyal to him, men who had been pushed out by the new, greedy regime. He prepared an arsenal in his basement, the room smelling of gun oil and old leather. He was stepping back into the blood, but this time, he wasn't doing it for power. He was doing it for a girl who had dared to speak the truth. He looked at Hae-rim, who was learning how to load a magazine under his guidance. "This isn't your world," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "I'm only in it because I made it." Hae-rim didn't look away. "Then help me end it," she replied, for the first time. Jin-woo felt the weight of his loyalty code shift from the organization to the individual. To find the location of the main holding cell, they had to attend a high society gala where the syndicate's primary financial backer was being honored. At the gala, surrounded by Seoul's elite, Jin-woo and Hae-rim moved as a team. She played the role of his elegant assistant, her quiet grace now a weapon of infiltration. They moved through the crowd of politicians and CEOs, individuals who profited from the very crimes Jin-woo was trying to stop. While Jin-woo distracted the security detail with a display of his old authority, Hae-rim slipped into the hotel's private offices. She discovered a hidden server room containing the coordinates for the merchandise holding cells. The most shocking discovery was that the primary cell wasn't in some remote shipyard. It was a reinforced vault directly beneath the very rooftop restaurant where they had first met. The realization that the restaurant, his favorite hideout, was a front for a trafficking cell made Jin-woo's blood run cold. It was a calculated insult, a way for his subordinates to show him that they ruled the very ground he walked on. He and Hae-rim spent the night analyzing the blueprints of the building. The vault was a state-of-the-art facility, accessible only through a service elevator that was coded to the lieutenant's biometrics. They realized they couldn't just blast their way in. They had to infiltrate it from the inside during a shipment transfer. Hae-rim's knowledge of the restaurant's back hallways and employee schedules became their greatest asset. They weren't just planning a rescue, they were planning an execution of an entire system of exploitation. In a quiet moment before the storm, Jin-woo sat with Hae-rim in the back of a darkened car parked overlooking the Han River. He finally explained the guilt of the Iron Wolf, how he had lost his own sister to the streets 25 years ago and had built an empire to ensure it never happened again, only to become the very thing he hated. "I thought silence was my protection," he admitted, his eyes fixed on the lights of the city. "But it was just my hiding spot." Hae-rim reached out, her hand momentarily covering his tattooed fist. "You're not hiding anymore," she said softly. She saw the man behind the legend, a person who had been so focused on survival that he had forgotten how to live. For the first time, Jin-woo didn't pull away. The silence between them was no longer a weapon or a shield, it was a bridge. The syndicate realized the breach and launched a desperate counterattack on Jin-woo's estate. Assassins flooded the grounds, but they didn't count on Hae-rim's cunning. She used the estate's security system to trap the lead hitters in a decontamination room, giving Jin-woo the opening he needed to clear the rest. The reclusive boss was gone. In his place was a man of focused, righteous violence. He moved through his own home with a lethality that terrified the invaders. They weren't just fighting for their lives, they were fighting for the chance to finish what they started. When the last assassin fell, Jin-woo looked at Hae-rim, who was holding a security tablet with steady hands. "They know we're coming," he said. "Good," she replied. "I want them to see us." They headed straight for the docks to intercept a shipment that contained the last of the missing children, including information on her brother's final location. The shipyard was a maze of rusted steel and salt air, a place where Jin-woo had first earned his name as a boy. He moved with a lethality that terrified his former men, his suit now discarded for tactical gear that showed the full extent of his tattoos. He wasn't just fighting for his territory, he was fighting for the brother of the woman who had dared to slip him a note. They found the holding container, but as they broke the lock, a familiar figure stepped out of the shadows. It was his lead lieutenant, holding a detonator in one hand and a weapon in the other. Inside the container, they found her brother, but he wasn't the man she remembered. His eyes were vacant, his mind broken by years of conditioning to serve as a high-level enforcer for the syndicate. He had been turned into a weapon to be used against his own sister. The brother didn't recognize Hae-rim. He raised a weapon at Jin-woo, his movements mechanical and devoid of emotion. Hae-rim stepped in front of the barrel, her voice a desperate plea for him to remember the red lilies they used to pick in the fields behind their childhood home. The tension was unbearable as the lieutenant laughed in the background, enjoying the spectacle of a broken family. The lieutenant fired from the darkness, aiming for Hae-rim to end the distraction. Jin-woo threw himself in front of her, taking a bullet meant for her chest, his blood staining the cold concrete of the docks. The Iron Wolf didn't fall. Despite the wound, he rose one last time, a shadow of vengeance that dismantled the remaining syndicate members with a finality that silenced the docks forever. He didn't kill the brother. He neutralized him gently, using a maneuver he had taught the boy a decade ago. He pinned the lieutenant to a shipping container, his eyes burning with a fire that had been dormant for years. "You forgot one thing," Jin-woo whispered. "The Iron Wolf doesn't need a pack." With the syndicate leadership destroyed and the children rescued, Jin-woo turned his attention to the systemic corruption. He didn't return to the shadows. He used his remaining influence to bring down every official who had taken a bribe, every CEO who had looked the other way. He dismantled his own empire piece by piece, ensuring that the wealth he had accumulated was used to fund the recovery of the victims. He walked through the ruins of his former life with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in decades. He had broken his silence, but in doing so, he had finally found his voice. In the aftermath, Jin-woo disappeared from the luxury penthouses and the boardrooms of Seoul. The Iron Wolf became a myth once more, but the trafficking rings in the city were dismantled within weeks thanks to the evidence he provided. Hae-rim remained in the city, helping her brother recover in a quiet facility far from the reach of dangerous men. One evening, a delivery arrived at her new home, a simple burger from a local shop. Beneath the bun was a final note, written in Jin-woo's steady hand. "The silence is finally peaceful. Be safe, Hae-rim." She looked out at the city lights, no longer feeling like a victim of its shadows. Somewhere out there, the man who had been her target and then her savior was finally free of his own ghosts.